This a introduction for Jack.
Jack is going to speak today. It's his icebreaker. And good morning, fellow Toastmasters. Sorry, I started in the middle because I was on mute. And we are all going to be surprised by the title of his speech. Take it away, Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, and thank you, Anna. Also for the timer, could I get verbal cues? And also, I know that the icebreaker is meant to be 4 to 6 minutes, but could I get 5 to 7 minutes instead?
Yes, you can. We'll make that allowance.
Thank you. Let me share my screen real quick. Can everyone see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And good morning, Executive Toastmasters. I'm very excited today to be giving my first prepared speech. And for my icebreaker, I want to go over an aspect of my life which is very near and dear to me, and that's flying. And not only do I want to cover my background of myself as a pilot, but I want to go over a time in which I had to get back from New Jersey under the COVID-19 outbreak of 2020. But before I launch completely into that story itself, I want to cover my flying background. Would you be surprised to know that I actually did my first flight lesson at the age of 11? It's true that there's actually no minimum age requirement to start your flight training. And what's even crazier is that when I was 11, it wasn't even me who wanted to start flight training. It was my dad who wanted me to start flight training. And he's not even the pilot. He hasn't ever been a pilot, and he probably will never be a pilot. But fortunately, when you live vicariously for your kids, sometimes it tends to end up being a good thing. By the time I was 15, I knew I at least wanted to get my private pilot license. And when I turned 16, not only was I driving around by myself, I was also flying around by myself. 16 is not the age when you can first get your private pilot license, but it's the age when you can start soloing, which means you can fly around by yourself. And that's the image I have here on this slide. And that was 7 years ago, which seems like a long time now. But by the time I was 17, I passed my private pilot license test, and I was a full-fledged pilot. And I have gotten more ratings as I've trained since I got my initial license. My most recent rating was my helicopter add-on, which was 2 summers ago. But right now I'm sitting over 650 hours of total flight time and airplanes, helicopters, and even a couple hours in gliders. But out of all of those hours I've accumulated over the years, most of that's been spent in one plane in particular. And that is my family's Cessna 182. What was really great about this aircraft is that even though it was higher performance than the trainer aircraft I was flying at the time, it was still a forgiving aircraft and was able to take my family to many places. We were able to go on many vacations all the way to many spots in Texas. And the first trip I took my family was from Oklahoma City all the way to Cheyenne, Wyoming. But when I started my college at Princeton University, my freshman year, I decided to leave the plane at home in Oklahoma. Unfortunately, this meant that the plane was going to be left sitting in the hangar for most of the time. But by the time sophomore year rolled around, I decided I was going to change things up. I was going to fly all the way from Oklahoma City to Trenton, New Jersey, a 9-hour trek. Even if you've been on a road trip for 9 hours or longer, flying takes a much more mental toll. And by the time I remember getting down in Trenton, New Jersey, my body was aching all over, and I just wanted a glass of water from the headache I had. But at least if I was able to get from Oklahoma City to Trenton, New Jersey, it wasn't going to be as hard getting back. But unfortunately, 2020 had other plans in mind. By the time spring break of 2020 was rolling around, Princeton University announced that all the students were going to have to leave campus and find housing elsewhere. And this put me in a unique conundrum. Not only did I have to pack up all of my things, I had to figure out a way to get my family's plane all the way back home from Trenton, New Jersey, back to Oklahoma City. A trip that takes over 1,100 miles and it's going to at least take longer than 9 hours. I need to figure out a way to get back not only in a quick way, but in a safe way. But unfortunately, the weather was not going to prove to be easy at this time. The March weather for 2020 was very tumultuous, and it was going to be a lot of planning in order to get home. Unfortunately, I was not able to get back straight from New Jersey to Oklahoma, but I did have a roommate and he was also a pilot. but he allowed me to stay with him in Cleveland for however long I needed to. My next plan this time was to just go fly to Cleveland and wait out the weather, and then hopefully I'd be able to fly back to Oklahoma once everything cleared up. I did enjoy some scenic views on the way from New Jersey to Ohio. I took a screenshot over Pennsylvania, and although that it's nice to fly over areas of the country which are very scenic, you don't want to have any engine problems when you're flying over these rocky or mountainous areas. But when I got to Ohio, it turned out that the weather there was going to be very unfortunate. Every time the weather was good in Ohio, it was going to be bad in Oklahoma. And when the weather was good in Oklahoma, it was bad in Ohio. I just couldn't catch a break. But after a week of staying in Ohio and Cleveland, COVID-19 just kept getting worse and worse. How long would it be until something much more drastic was taken? In my mind, maybe martial law, or they would have shut down the airways. But on March 21st, 2020, I decided that I needed to leave and I couldn't just keep waiting anymore. And if you looked out on the sky that day in Ohio when I left, you must have thought that I was crazy. Low overcast clouds dominated the area. And not only that, it was cold enough to where if I entered the clouds, I would have had icing on my aircraft, which is more dangerous because if I got ice on any part of my aircraft, there would have been no way to get it off. But I decided to part low under the clouds. And for 2 hours, I was flying at an altitude of just 1,000 feet over the ground.
Yeah.
Fortunately, by the time I reached my midway point in Missouri, the weather had cleared enough to where I wasn't worried as much anymore about the initial weather conditions. But even as I was approaching Oklahoma, the weather still had one more thing in stock for me. Even though storms were starting to roll through Oklahoma City, I had enough space to dodge around them and fortunately land back home safely. Overall, this whole trip from New Jersey, Ohio, then to Oklahoma took 10 hours total and took over a week of a minor layover in Cleveland. When I look back on this flight, I do think it's one of the most riskiest decisions I've ever made since. But fortunately, that flying is long past me. And right now, I'm very delighted I'm here to tell the story with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack.